One of the things that you learn doing investigations is that you always have to assume you're wrong all the way up into the point that you're proven right. You have to be your own worst critic. So, believe it or not, I actually do pay attention to the people that have taken issue with my channel and say that I'm crazy about all this stuff in Central America and the issues with the Fitzgerald and McCain. The biggest knock that they have on my channel, I should say our channel to my contributors, is this argument that accidents happen all the time. And this was just people not paying attention. They also said that I've had a whole bunch of different theories, and that is true. Anybody who has ever been in investigations know that you chase down a lot of wild geese. You do. You go down a lot of roads that never end up panning out. But you have to go down those roads to make sure. And you have to go down them believing that's where you need to be. Now, we're going to get back to this picture here a little bit later. But I wanted to illustrate something to address those 2 points. The first one, I've talked about the, that's the wrong one, but we'll get to that one in a minute. The USS Porter Collision. Now, in that issue, we see a great many things that can teach us how the military acts when it's an accident. Accidents happen all the time in the military, every single day. There's collisions off base with people with their personal vehicles, people with military vehicles. There's guys who go write bad checks. There's all sorts of different things that go wrong in the military where the military has to be involved with civilian authorities. And the one thing that is the hallmark of when it's just something simple like that, the military goes out of its way to accommodate the civilian authority. Usually in vehicle accidents, unless it's something egregious, the military will take full responsibility themselves, not even ask questions, and just pay for it and be done, just to avoid any kind of controversy. Now, this is the USS Porter Collision. This is a TV report 3 months after the collision, and I want you to listen to this. It's a 2-minute clip, and I've got it sped up.
Her skipper was relieved of command, and the Navy was embarrassed when a U.S. destroyer in the Enterprise strike group was involved in an accident in the Strait of Hormuz last August.
Lieutenant Josiah Zarkhan tells us the crew of the USS Porter turned what could have been a tragedy into a triumph.
The Big E drew the big crowd at yesterday's homecoming, but the return of the USS Porter was certainly a big story. A story of bad news and good news for the Navy that began with a collision in the early morning hours of August 12th in the Strait of Hormuz.
We had a 160,000-ton water displacement Japanese tanker impact the starboard side of USS Porter.
The collision left a 20 by 30 foot hole in the ship above the waterline.
We knew that something, it wasn't a normal hit.
Chief James Antoine is an interior communication chief on the Porter. He was in his rack sleeping when the collision occurred at 1 a.m.
Everybody was emotional. We had everybody was scared, we were frightened.
According to Chief Antoine, several spaces took on water, but the crew responded with damage control procedures.
We pulled together to do what we had to do to get to Dubai.
We pulled into the UAE, I think, August 12th, and we were back underway September 29th.
Commander Dave Richardson took command of the ship after the collision, replacing the previous CO.
There's no doubt about it. There were some mistakes made. The CO has been fired, that's known, and we'll determine what's next beyond that.
And yet, the story of the Porter is a source of pride for the commander of the Enterprise Strike Group.
She has sailed with us through the Suez Canal. She came through the Strait of Hormuz with us last time, made it through across the Atlantic with us, threaded the needle through 3 hurricanes.
To return on time with the group. At Naval Station Norfolk, Art Kahn, 10 on your side.
The repair that was done to the Porter was what the Navy calls a voyage repair. She was already scheduled for an availability in the yard next year, and more extensive repairs will be done at that time.
Okay, now clearly we can see the fleet commander, the commander of the ship, and an enlisted man aboard 3 months later having full and complete access to the media. Talking about what happened, no non-disclosure agreements, No secrecy, no strange reporting anomalies. Nothing about that. This is how the military handles an actual accident. And this was November 5. That happened in August of 2012. So only a matter of months. So, to also illustrate this point, how different the issue with the Fitzgerald McCain is, this other one. Now, this is something I found that I was completely unaware of. This was from a long time ago. 2 U.S. Navy ships, the USS Downs and the USS Fletcher in the Pacific Ocean, and they collide. Now, I've got this at the 4:42 mark. We're going to watch about 2 minutes here.
Alongside the USS Fletcher. Here we are. Look out. We just cleared the Fletcher and the sounding general quarters. Okay, we're surveying a little damage done at the aft refueling station. There's the captain's gig. Get a shot panning down the side of the Fletcher.
Okay, what do we see? Immediately, the collision alert goes off and stays going off for more than 2 seconds. Immediately, they call general quarters. So here's an example of a collision, a real collision that you can see with your own eyes, and then you can hear with your own ears exactly how it happens. But in the case of the Fitzgerald, general quarters wasn't called for 13 minutes. The collision alarm only sounded for 2 seconds. Nobody reported to the base for almost an hour. Had to use a personal cell phone to do it, even though in their report they said they don't lose communications until 20 minutes after that phone call. And then here is another story. Here's a guy who was aboard I want to get the ships right here. He was aboard a ship and a submarine surfaced into it. And one's the Hartford and the other is the New Orleans, I think, yeah. And so he tells his whole story here. Yeah, USS Hartford, a Los Angeles class submarine, and the New Orleans. Not sure what kind of ship that is, but point being, no non-disclosure here. Guy aboard, he was a cook, and strangely enough, they show a picture of the damage to the New Orleans, and it looks vaguely familiar location-wise. Don't you think? Kind of a strange coincidence, yet another one. And this is, in fact, what happens when a submarine surfaces into a surface ship. And this is where the damage was. So, I think we've demonstrated definitively and clearly all of the anomalies in the reporting. Anomalies from their ship. And we've also been able to show, as controls, how the Navy behaves when there are actual accidents and actual collisions. And we can contrast that with how they're behaving now. We are, what, almost 8 months out? There hasn't been a single enlisted person aboard either ship say one word to one media outlet anywhere about this. And I'll say this for the, 1000th time. They called a press conference less than 48 hours after the event with wrong information and with a promise of complete and full cooperation with the Japanese and Filipino authorities. If you don't believe me, go watch. It's on YouTube, the Admiral Aucoin press conference. That's all you got to Google. You can actually even get the transcript where he says full and complete cooperation, and then within 4 or 5 days, that all goes away. The only people who had access to the Fitzgerald and the McCain are the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Navy, even though in the case of the Fitzgerald it happened in Japanese waters, and the U.S. Navy called the Japanese Coast Guard for assistance. They called the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force themselves for the assistance. None of those organizations were allowed to do any independent investigation of their own whatsoever into those incidents. Now, this issue in South America we're going to cover as we get out of the video today. There have been people that have said I'm scaremongering and I'm scaring people about this. Well, here is an article from Dialogo Americas talking about Panamanian drug interdiction. And I want to read something to you. And this is a quote. There has been a noticeable increase in activity by illegal networks seeking to penetrate our island territory and coastal areas to spread violence which challenges and threatens our national security. Commissioner Belcio Gonzalez, Director General of CREWMAN, said. CREWMAN will keep cracking down hard on them. Now here's something you're not going to know unless you've been here. Panama is really two different places. You have the Canal Zone, which if you arrive in Panama City or Colón, there are many things that you would see that would remind you of the southern part of the United States. Very few things are not available that are available in the United States in the Canal Zone. However, when you get outside the Canal Zone to the Darien Gap, or over here toward Costa Rica, it is as wild and as untamed and unaccounted for as any other place in the world. The Darien Gap is one of the largest unbroken tracts of dense jungle in the world. To quote Jesse Ventura, this makes Cambodia look like Kansas. And it does. Why do you think this road just ends there? This is Colombia over here. We have documented the Hezbollah fighters brought in. And in that quote, you basically hear it. That they are penetrating these jungles and they are penetrating these areas under the cover of night and under the cover of drug use and drug trade. But with what we're seeing now in Colombia, with the rise of the FARC, the rise of the ELN, the resurgence of the AGC, they're running their own presidential candidate. And what we see in Venezuela, the people they have in charge, you know, we call vice president, like Mike Pence, for example, he stays behind the scenes and he lets the current president do his thing. In Venezuela, Maduro has granted his vice president, Tarek El-Assami, decree powers. And we covered this in another video. So he basically is the co-president. He can just decree law. Think of an executive order on steroids, or how a king would operate. And these people absolutely loathe the U.S. and loathe its interests. And this area is not policeable. It's just not. And can easily be infiltrated. There is a ton of child trafficking down here. If you want to talk about the pedo thing, you need to be talking about Central America. You need to forget about what you're seeing, the conspiracy theory nonsense. If you really are concerned about children and child trafficking, you need to talk about Panama. And you need to talk about Central and South America. Natalie Holloway, a lot of people don't know where Aruba is. Aruba's on the northern coast of Venezuela. And that's where that girl went missing. It's a big deal, folks. because you're looking at the last two countries where the U.S. has any interest. And in this particular country here, the single most important geographic financial asset to the United States in the hemisphere, bar none, is a hop, skip, and a jump away from two countries that are on the brink of becoming Russian puppet states. And if that happens, it's over. If they can control the canal and effectively divide our Navy into a West Coast Navy and an East Coast Navy by restricting travel through the Panama Canal. And the Panamanians, you have to remember something. That canal is theirs. They own it now. It's their deal. Carter gave it to them. If they decide, you know what? They're in bed with the Chinese. We feel safer having Russian security forces here than we do American. And we want them to provide the security for the canal. That's well within Panama's right to do. Nothing we could do about it. They could take it and not fire a shot. So, anyway, 16 minutes. I don't normally like to go much longer than that. Thank you, everyone. It looks like here in the next day or two, the channel is going to simultaneously cross 4 million views and 10,000 subscribers. And that has to do with you guys. I have the best contributors to my channel. The amount of information you bring, the intelligence level you bring, the organization that you guys have brought to bring this out and bring it to the forefront has been nothing short of a miracle. And I hope to God that we can somehow take this to the next level so that we can get some justice for those sailors. And maybe give a warning to these people in Panama about what's coming. So, anyway, like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.